Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webcast, Driving Gender Diversity, How to Build Workplaces That Work for All Women, sponsored by Reach Higher. This webcast has been pre-approved for an HRCI credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credit. You will receive an email from hr.com within 2 business days, which will include the certification credit information. You may also log into your hr.com account and view the credits you have received. If you have questions during the webcast, please click on the Q&A box in your webinar controls and type them in. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Addie Schwartz.
Thank you so much, and I am so excited for all of you to be joining today. Welcome, everyone. I am so lucky to be sitting here with my illustrious panelists, Sylvia Malebjian from Analog Devices, Summer Davies from the Mars Corporation, Shara Owen Schwartz from Rocket Software, and we are going to have a great discussion today on how to build workforces and workplaces that work for all women. So before we get started, and it's a very meaty topic, I do want to take a few minutes to just talk a little bit about the landscape out there. What is the current climate? Then we'll go into our great fireside chat. And please, all along the way, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat and we will get to them. So let's first talk about the Great Resignation. It's staggering to know that 15 million Americans have quit their jobs since April of this year. That's right, 15 million jobs, 15 million Americans. It's happening everywhere. Employees are rethinking everything, where they work, how they work, and how work fits into their lives. And the staggering statistic is that, believe it or not, 1 out of every 2 women are planning on changing their jobs in the next 6 months. Isn't that incredible? That's half of our workforce of females are going to think about leaving or changing their jobs. Companies need to think differently about a lot of things. That means flexible career pathing, internal mobility, different kinds of benefits, many more supports. If organizations don't do these things, we're going to have women walking out the door. And guess what? What have we seen with the pandemic? 2.5 million women have been walking out the door, leaving the workforce since the pandemic. And we've been in this now for about 22 months. If you look at the US labor force participation rate for women, we have reached a 33-year low back to 1988 levels. That means that we have lost 33 years of progress in gender diversity in our organizations. And there are lots of crazy numbers out there. You know, the other number is 1 in 3 working women have considered downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce. As a CEO of Reach Higher, a company committed to diversity, equity, and more opportunity in the workplace for women, we have taken this seriously, and for almost a decade, we have been focused exclusively on creating replenishing opportunities for women, as well as taking women and building them up and further supporting them so that they can grow and thrive in their organizations. So if you look at this 1 in 3 statistic, 1 in 3 working women, that's a third of working women, are considering leaving or downshifting their careers. And the pandemic just drags on and on. I wonder what it's going to look like next year. If you look at the statistics from the McKinsey and Women in the Workplace report from last year, 1 year ago, that stat was 1 in 4. So here we have 1 in 3 working women. I hope it's not 1 in 2 working women next year, which is potentially where we're going. In any event, we know that the pandemic has blurred the lines between work and home, between personal lives and professional careers. I know that so many of us were suddenly forced to pick up and move everything into our home environments. And if you think about it, it's actually the biggest change since the Industrial Revolution, when people left their farms to work in buildings. That's amazing. And work now is no longer a place. It's something that we do almost anywhere we are. And technology has pushed that along as well. But it's clear that companies need to pay special attention to women and underrepresented groups within their organizations so that women can flourish. We need to do more. We can't live with a 33-year pushback to workforce representation, let alone where we are in the pipeline at the different levels for women being represented. So let's now take a quick look at why women are quitting. They're quitting for a variety of reasons. And let's talk about it and address them head on. That's certainly what we're going to do with our panelists. We need to treat childcare as a business issue. And we've heard a lot about this, especially recently with Washington, D.C. We're the only country with the wealth that we have that doesn't have mandatory parental and maternity leave. That's something that we really need to think about changing. We need to make it affordable for women to stay in their jobs. We need to understand where and work needs really to be done. And we need to know that hybrid work is here to stay and offer opportunities for continuous learning and growth. That's what employees are looking for. So the question is, how are we going to stop the Great Resignation? And how are we going to create engaging, meaningful environments where employees feel like they're valued, where they'll want to stay and grow and continue to contribute? We spend so much time and energy investing in our people. We need to make sure that they feel that they belong, that they have connections, that they're networked together, and that they're continually to grow professionally, and that their personal lives fit in with their shared goals, as well as the values that they bring to the organization. It's interesting to see that today, 51% of employees leave because they don't feel a sense of belonging at work. How do we create these environments and cultures where there's engagement, meaning, and a strong sense of belonging? Well, we're going to learn a little bit about that in just 2 more minutes, but I do want to talk about one more thing. The last thing is the broken rung. We need to proactively address the broken rung. It was originally coined in 2018 by the famous Women in the Workplace report by the McKinsey organization that women aren't getting promoted at the same levels as men, even from individual contributor to manager. That means that the ripple effect through the entire pipeline is staggering. And so we're never going to catch up if we can't even fix it with emerging leaders that are ready and are excited and motivated, but don't have the opportunities to really grow and thrive. We need to provide equity in women's careers. And we know that maybe at certain levels, we're making very small gains, but it's not without its costs. And as we're seeing with the women leaving with the she-cession, physically picking themselves up saying, I've had enough, I need to take a break, it's not without its costs. There's burnout, and we need to be careful about that too. Lastly, we know women of color have it even worse than women in general. And you can see the stats. The drop off between entry level and C-suite is more than 75% representation for women of color. And when you get to the C-suite, it's even worse. So we need to do a lot. There's a lot here. There's a lot to dig into. I feel like Rachel Thomas said it so well when she said we need to double and triple down on the broken rung. It's a numbers game, but we really need to double and triple down on women in general. I have been at this nearly 10 years, and we have the same issues that we did when I started Reach Higher in 2013. More needs to be done. Companies need to be proactive. They need to take action, and they need to provide the tools, the resources, and the stepping stones in order to enable women to thrive and flourish. The way I think about it is that there are 4 pillars that really are part of this equation. One is family-friendly work environments that are flexible, building communities and peer networks, offering expert mentoring and coaching, and fostering that sense of belonging. These are the 4 key pillars that together are the answer. And there are great ways of doing this, great programming that can happen that doesn't take a big toll on an organization, but allows employees to feel that they belong, that allows them to build networks and to provide growth for them. That is what corporations need to do. Provide a real sense of commitment and structure to enable women to build their skills, to build their networks, and to flex to their personal and professional needs. So now let's turn to our panelists, Sylvia from Analog Devices, Summer from Mars, Shara from Rocket, and let's join this great conversation. All right. So let's get the party started. Kind of ugly out there. I think as I was going there, I was like, wow, this sounds really bad. So Shara, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to take some water first. Given the challenges like the secession and the Great Resignation, what steps are you taking to support, engage, and retain the women in your organization, Rocket Software?
Yeah, thank you, Addie, Sylvia, and Summer for being here to have this important discussion and for setting the stage so nicely, Addie. I'm sure I'll want to reiterate some of the points that you've made, right? We're talking about a few things here that are at play. There's the engagement support piece, there's the burnout piece, there's the intersectionality that we need to pay attention to. Addie, as you talked about earlier, that 1 in 3, I just want to say that again so that folks can really take that in. 1 in 3 women are looking to leave or downshift their job, right? And then 42% are just feeling like they've had it, they're just burnt out. And that's up since last year. That's up 10% since last year, right? And that's in the throes of the pandemic. And so while over 7 years ago, I mean, over the past 7 years, right, we've seen some upticks in women overall in terms of being represented in different leadership roles. This has not moved an inch for women of color, right? And so between those entry-level jobs in the C-suite, representation for women of color fall off 75%. So going into the pandemic, we at Rocket were really thoughtful about how we were going to support our Rocketeers and how we'd support women.
And how are you doing that? How are you doing that, Shara? Let's talk specifically.
Yes. So we responded by answering the question, how do we ensure that women thrive, right? And so one of the really critical and very basic things that we did is that we extended our mental health supports, right? We went beyond the EAP and set up supports for all of our Rocketeers and women to get coaching, life coaching, and professional coaching. We had circles, conversation circles where women could get together, folks could get together and talk about relevant topics. So it was that additional piece of supporting women. We provided a level of flexibility that women needed. And many women are mothers, many women are single mothers, right? And we're really just trying to juggle that home, work, children, sometimes elder care, right? And so managers, right, had to step up and work closely with people really on a case-to-case basis to understand what the critical needs were, right? And this has been a really important part of helping women to continue work and to continue to thrive. And we paid attention to different geographies. We're a global organization, different geographies and what people needed there. So we had sort of leaders really paying attention to the engagement piece so that we could create just fun things to do with different folks in the different geographies.
That's great. That's great. I feel like that the mental health piece is something that I'm sure has hit a lot of organizations.
And I'd like to just kind of build on top of what Shara shared, which I think is just really great to hear. And hopefully some of these efforts will move us from she session, which is really hard to say, to kind of a she recovery overall. So just like quick context is, first of all, Analog Devices, we're a 50-year plus semiconductor business and recently have grown to become an over 20,000 person multinational company. And overall, we have this rich heritage and culture that really prides itself on collaboration and relationships in addition to our technology innovation. But you said something about paying attention, but we also know that in order to continually look at our talent and have a pulse of our talent, we also need to continually hold the mirror up to ourselves. We expect it of ourselves, our clients, investors, and let's face it, society as a whole expect it too. So over the past 12 to 18 months in particular, we're challenging ourselves to think differently. And Shara, you mentioned the role of the people manager. And we've had a particular focus on our people managers overall and working with them in a way that meets employees where they are, especially women. So this heightened attention on the role of the people manager and making sure we're supporting those people managers. For the most part, prior to all of this happening, people managers were pretty much on their own to figure it out and not really fully aware of the critical role that they play in engaging and retaining women. So for example, we have worked with people managers to kind of change the mindset and narrative from how many hours someone works to the focus on the outcomes. And I'm sure many of us have heard that before, but really making sure that that is an adopted mindset. And tactically, we have provided our people managers with somewhat of a playbook and training on what they can do to make a difference in the engagement and retention of our female employees, and options that are available. Options that they didn't realize were available. And this has also pivoted the thinking from kind of this one size fits all approach to a focus on empathy, psychological safety, and inclusion, and it's had an impact, particularly on women by meeting them where they are overall.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Somebody want to chime in here?
Yeah, happy to do it. So for a little bit of context, I work with Mars Incorporated. Most folks don't know that right off the bat, but you probably enjoy our treats, or at least we hope you do. We make M&Ms and a number of other confectionery products. But in addition to our candy and confectionery and gum products, we also make pet food and treats, and we also provide veterinary care here in the United States. And that's particularly relevant for the challenges that we're facing around how to engage women in our workforce. So for us, through the pandemic and now coming back, one of the things that was most important about understanding all of our different employee sets and the challenges that they're facing is to really understand what did they go through the pandemic. Many organizations had a commonality that all of their associates or employees were at home and were going through that transition of going home and now are possibly going back to the office. And in fact, many of our associates never left because they're in a manufacturing environment and food was a necessity. And so they continue to come into work every day. So the challenges that those individuals faced, especially women in cases where they are the primary caregiver, either for a child or for a parent, their challenges were entirely different, not necessarily more or less so, but different than people who were working with perhaps homeschooling or different environments trying to work from home. So for us, as we start thinking about how do we support women in the workplace, we had to get really clear about what was the unique experience that we were seeing for our different associates and start thinking about, even if we do, as Addie mentioned, live in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we may have a long conversation about what we should or shouldn't offer as a country, within our own organization, we can have that conversation on what's our corporate responsibility and how can we make sure that we have what we believe is an adequate level of paternity and maternity leave that is offered equally to moms and dads. So we extended to 18 weeks of leave, thinking about how do we include emergency childcare as part of a standard package for our benefits, so that when we have associates who are facing those unique challenges, they have benefits that can meet whatever their unique circumstances. So for us, that became a really important piece of trying to make sure that we are having flexible responses to the women in our workplace. And then the other piece, as we start coming back, for those who are starting to come back to the office, is really encouraging the concept of allowing the work to dictate what does the future look like. So we've been talking about flexible work hours and flexible environments for maybe a decade, and I have been aware that that's really important, but even more so as we've proven that people can be entirely productive on the hours that work for them and from home. Being intentional about helping managers understand, how do we identify what work does actually need to be done in person? Where can we see more creativity or more productivity when we're in person? And when can we have more flexibility, rather than stringent return to work type of environments that arbitrarily announce a day or a time that folks have to be in the office? And we see that those types of things help women particularly.
I hear a thread here, both between Sylvia and Summer, about psychological safety. And I think, Shara, you might have even hit upon it a little bit as well, with this notion of feeling safe, heard, and listened to. And, obviously, the Aurora platform that we have creates that safe space and that community and connection in order to do that, especially in environments that women, are not equally represented, and even more so in some cases where men are dominant players. But I think that's part of the equation, right? Feeling psychologically safe and being the person that you are amidst all of the things that you have going on, whether or not you're a woman or anyone, all employees. The other theme I heard was listening to your employees and knowing that it's not a one size fits all. I do think that there were some organizations that were very homogenous and everybody moved, as knowledge workers to their homes. But I remember and are thinking about some of your organizations that have manufacturing capability. Your plants have to keep going. And in fact, Summer, when I'm thinking pet food, last I saw, the whole pet industry went crazy because everybody was like, I'm home now, I can actually have a pet. I couldn't used to before. So I'm sure that business went through the roof, which meant your workers that were in those factories had to come in despite everything. So interesting conversations here about, what is workplace flexibility to whom, and what does this all mean as you're trying to build a career and keep things going at home. So, okay, does anybody else want to comment on that, or are we good to go on to another question? Okay, I think we're good to go on to another question. Please want to encourage folks to add some comments or questions to the chat, because we'll have some time to go into the chat towards the end, and would love to make sure that your questions are answered. Okay, Sylvia, I'm going to turn it to you and talk about increased levels of burnout. And what we're hearing, since the beginning of the pandemic. I think that if anybody told any of us that we'd be at this 22 months later, I don't know what we would do, because it sounds so difficult and depressing. But here we are. I think that, with people on all the time and the Zoom fatigue, there's a lot of us that don't get time to do anything other than stay in front of our computer and have meeting after meeting, and then an extra meeting or two that get put into our schedule because it looks like we have a free moment. So let's talk about, analog devices and, burnout and women. What are you doing as an organization for workplace flexibility to encourage that sense of community and help, curb that burnout?
Yeah, no, thanks, Addie. And I think Summer touched upon this as well. So we did, over the past several months, did roll out a flex work program, which is really new and different for analog devices, which is, prior to the pandemic, working from home was the norm. It really was the culture. I mean, being in the office was really the norm overall. But this, flex work program, it really required a in particular, a keen focus on our more than 2,500 people managers that I mentioned earlier. That I'm going to emphasize that about the role of the people manager in making all this work. So including how to have those effective connections and conversations, again, move away from the traditional hours and make women feel more included and feel like that they're being heard. And, for example, we are building this awareness with managers around even something as simple as having that 8:30 a.m. meeting when women are trying to get their kids off to school. So building more of that level of awareness through continual conversations and really learning how to adjust based on what they learn about the individual employee, and in this case, in women. And again, tremendous cultural shift, adopting alternative ways of working was really unheard of before the pandemic. But at the end of the day, we really believe that empowering employees and people managers and giving them that flexibility, they will be accountable and achieve results. And it kind of kiboshes the whole thinking of, well, if you're not logging those hours and I don't see you, then you're not going to be achieving results. And we've seen that be quite the opposite. And to support that whole theme of really making sure you're building that muscle with your people managers, we also created people manager forums. And we recognize the important role that people managers play in this space. And so these forums are addressing many topics, including burnout. So this is an area where managers can really engage in dialogue amongst each other and connect so that they don't feel like they're on their own to figure this whole thing out. So, for example, one manager shared the concept of meeting-free Fridays, which sparked a whole kind of dialogue across the manager forum. And it's things like this where, again, managers feel and recognize that they're empowered, and doing things like this can go a long way. And in this case, it created this space for women and employees in general, amidst those back-to-back meetings that you mentioned, Addie, that we know contributes to burnout. So, overall, managers don't realize just how empowered they actually are. And then also tactically, we've magnified our available benefits and employee assistance programs that people may not be completely aware of, where we spent time reacquainting women, employees, people managers to the benefits to support them. And for specific examples, we expanded our parental leave from 3 weeks to 6 weeks, so it doubled. Our maternity benefit expanded an additional 2 weeks to 10 weeks for a total of about 16 weeks for birth mothers. And we continue to promote backup care. We work with Bright Horizons, as well as other resources through our employee assistance, such as tutoring, and making sure that parents, working parents, know that things like tutoring are available to them.
Great. Well, what I heard was focusing on outcomes versus hours, thinking about not only the employee, but the manager and how they fit together, and just, flex work in general and how it fits. Shara, do you have some thoughts that you'd like to share about this, about burnout? How do we address burnout? And what are you doing at Rocket to sort of create that sense of community and belonging and make people feel like that they, love where they are and that they are bringing meaning to their contribution every day?
Yeah, absolutely. And Sylvia, I think a really important point that you made was about listening to your employees. And that is so critical. I think we did a really good job in the beginning of sort of anticipating the needs of our Rocketeers, right? And then we actually went out and asked folks. So earlier this year, I did a listening tour across the organization, across geographies, and really helped to inform, how we could best be supportive of our Rocketeers. And belonging is something that we pay close attention to all the time in the pandemic, and this is going to extend for whatever comes next. Our core values at Rocket are empathy, humanity, trust, and love. And these are pretty amazing, and it provides a really solid foundation for the work that I do with RIDE, which is Rocket's Inclusion, Diversity, Equity Initiative. And every day we strive that our Rocketeers, and we make explicit, and this seems like a very small thing, but it's actually a big thing. You make it explicit that there's an expectation that you are going to show up as your authentic self, right? So this could mean like, no, I'm not doing well today, right? And for that to be okay. And this feeds into what we were talking about earlier about psychological safety, right? Creating that environment where people don't always have to be on or be at their very best, and they can be human. Because if you minimize these feelings of being othered because maybe you're not doing well, and your contributions are valued, your unique contributions are valued, you mitigate that additional tax that women are often paying of, you know, either being who they think they need to be, or that extra going, you know, above and beyond when they just can't. So you take away that fight for people to be heard and included, in particularly women of color who have that extra burden that they're carrying. So those, what seems small, but really communicating that message that no, this is what we expect you to show up every day. And so we foster this belonging also by just managing differently, paying attention to the human skills, right, of inclusion and getting folks on board as allies, providing spaces to actually elevate women's voices. And we've done that through panels and where the whole organization attends. And you provide that space, right? And then you provide awareness across the organization, have events, education around really what women's experiences are.
Right.
And most importantly, you're holding folks accountable, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
we've also done that meeting free Friday, which has been helpful.
That's great.
I love the meeting free Friday. I think I may have to steal that for my own team. That sounds like such a great idea. And I think both women have just shared some amazing things. The thing I would add on is, as we think about the Great Resignation and this she session, which is still hard for me to say, a lot of that is so clearly tied to people having the opportunity to pause, or maybe it's not an opportunity, but the mandate to pause and think about what it is that they were doing with their time at work, right? We have all spent the majority of our adult lives going to work, working really, really hard, trying to keep all the plates spinning every day. And for many, especially women, it was an opportunity to sit and say, does what I do every day, is what I'm spending my time away from my children or my pets or my parents or my hobbies, is that bringing me meaning and purpose? And do I feel a connection to what I'm doing? And for many individuals, they're saying, I don't find a connection to my work, either because the function of what I do or the job that I do isn't meaningful to me, or the company that I work for doesn't live up to my expectations or bring me purpose. And so for us, we've leaned into a couple places there. We've tried to be a principle-based business for a long time. We're a family-owned business, since the families brought principles to us. And over the pandemic, really leaning into what does it mean to live your principles, and to, as an organization, show your commitment to those things. We also really leaned into our purpose as an organization to say, as a corporation, we actually have a tremendous impact. When we start thinking about our responsibility around, let's say, climate change, we have the same impact as a small country. So we can make those types of commitments and changes, and that will help us live out our purpose. And we hope that that also brings to life purpose for our employees, so that they can see that they're working for a corporation that has purpose and is bringing meaning to the world. And then, as Sylvia mentioned, how do we help equip managers to be able to help people identify their own individual purpose and bring that to work every day and connect that to the work that they're doing, to share really meaningful why are they here? So we did a great campaign. If you go on LinkedIn, you can look it up. It's #HereToBeHeard, encouraging the women in our workplace to share why they're here, share why they do what they do, and start being really open and candid about their purpose. And we found that that's been really meaningful, especially to women. And when we think about how do we retain that great talent and attract all these people who are resigning will need to go somewhere, I assume. We hope that they'll find a home in an organization like ours where they can live a purpose that feels meaningful to them.
That's so meaningful, Summer. And I feel like, each of you have touched on this in your own way, this notion of values and a company's values and how those values, overlay or align with an employee's values. And as we know, certainly millennials and Gen Z, and now with the pandemic, I think all of us are thinking longer and harder about how we get to work, what are we working on, where are we working, and how are we getting recognized for our work, and wanting to be in a place that people value who we are, however we show up, whenever we come, and to make it so that we have the opportunities to really do the best with what we have. So I feel like that is the challenge, right? To not only have the corporation decide their values and their purpose and make that crystal clear, but then have that align with employees and what they're looking for. Because at the end of the day, we spend a lot of our hours at work. So we want to be working on something that we care deeply about, that we're passionate about, and that we can feel like we can make change and make it for the better. I know that's why I get up every day, and for the past 30 years, been focused on companies to empower women and girls to make sure that they have the potential that they need. Okay, so let's now go on to the third question, because I want to make sure we have some time for a Q&A. But now I'm going to turn it to Summer. The latest Women in the Workplace report, which I shared a little bit, but I encourage folks to go on the McKinsey Lean In organization and check it out. They've been doing this study and reporting on corporations in America for many years now. It talks about that broken rung that I touched upon earlier. It's something that remains to be an issue. Is this an issue, Summer, for your organization, or is this just something that everybody else is worried about? And if so, what is your company doing to improve women's representation in leadership and in management positions?
Yeah, well, Addie, I wish I could say, no, we are the one organization who has cracked the code and all the rungs are perfect in our organization, but we know that that's not true. And interestingly, we did our own piece of internal research just before the pandemic, because we had an inkling that this was a problem, but we really didn't have our arms wrapped around how much of a problem was it and where was the problem. And then the more important thing was we didn't have great clarity on what specifically was causing the problem inside our organization. We've got generalities that come from studies like the McKinsey one, but we really wanted to understand for our organization and the unique makeup of our associates, what was the problem. So we did some research, and unfortunately it confirmed that we did have a broken rung. It was very, very clear at a very specific point in our talent pipeline. We had great equity up until that moment, and then we started to see women dropping off pretty dramatically. And specifically, we found that women of color were dropping off and never recovering at a more dramatic rate than anyone else. And so this, again, because we want to be a principle-based organization, we live by some really important values, was hard to read when it's black and white. It's a little easier when you're reading it about everyone else, but when it's about your organization, it's very hard to realize is true. And so we really leaned into why is this happening and what are some of the strategic actions we can take to try to address it, because we know that this is what we don't want to have be true as an organization. And so we've taken some specific steps out of that research. I mentioned the Here to Be Heard campaign. We also developed a women's leadership program that was specifically getting into some of the things we heard from the women that we spoke to. When we spoke to women who were dropping off, we heard things like, I feel lonely a lot of times at work. I feel like I don't have somebody who understands my experience. And then the other thing that women told us that men didn't tell us as often was, I sometimes feel like I'm crazy because I see things going on and I don't think anybody else sees it going on. So we knew that this meant we needed to really lean into this opportunity around social networking and helping individuals address that sense of loneliness and then surround them with multiple types of support. So mentors, allies, sponsors, great line managers, all these types of support, and looking into how do we start doing that. So we've launched a male allyship program to help men understand. We have so many well-intended folks in our organization, many men who also read this research and say, I want to be a part of solving that because I don't want that to be true for the women that I work with. I don't want it to be true for the women that I love. And so I want to be an active part of solving that. So the allyship network has been really, really powerful and helping start think about some of these different ways we can get everyone involved in addressing the problem. And I think that that starts with getting into the data. What's true in your organization? Where's it coming from? And start getting comfortable with that uncomfortable reality.
Okay, so last week we heard a lot about Facebook and girls and Instagram, and if you think about being isolated because of the pandemic, not being able to be a social being, like humans are social beings, right? And then so being isolated, never really working with your colleagues in normal setting, grabbing a sandwich, going out for a drink, being on a business trip with others to learn about them a little differently. And then you kind of overlay that with, what's happened with social media and how people can feel really alone. And so I think building those peer networks is really important, absolutely critical to building that sense of belonging. Sylvia, what kinds of tools are you seeing and what are you doing about this for the Broken Rung specifically?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a process we had started even before the pandemic, but the pandemic really magnified the need to make it a business imperative, because we know that DEI and the focus on women, it's no longer a standalone. I mean, we have momentum to make this pervasive and intentional in places where we either haven't seen it or it's not been so strong. So some examples of how we're addressing the broken rung is, one is just modeling it from the top, and we are modeling it from the top. For example, at the executive level, the two of our recent hires are women. So having this increased representation at both the board and the CEO staff levels is really a big step to shifting culture and mindsets and behaviors in a very meaningful way. Another way is, using data. We talk about, show me the data, but also do something with it. So really looking at using the data in a meaningful and impactful way, using it to kind of hold up the mirror to the organization and hold up the mirror to our leaders, especially our male leaders. For example, we had senior leaders, both male and female, participate in the program. And they were quite shocked when we held up the data that showed a drop in the female leadership when moving to more senior levels in the organization. So that is huge awareness building that we need to continue and not relent on. Something else we're doing is, making sure we Summer, you mentioned the pipeline. It's going beyond the pipeline, which can become stagnant if we're not careful, and focusing more on progression, not only the pipeline. So really taking a look at challenging our talent practices to look at, for example, the progression of our female talent and how to support them with development and exposure opportunities versus, again, only the narrowly focused leader pipeline, which can really, become stagnant if we're not careful. And this leads into just one highlight is targeted development programs, particularly for women. So we've over the last year have launched a flagship women's development program called Elevate, which looks at the unique needs of women across different career stages. So early career, mid-career, and senior career women. And the program is an example of meeting them where they are in terms of what each career stage faces. And the program also uses a kind of pay it forward model with the women supporting, for example, earlier career women in the program. And in this program, we use a combination of mentoring, coaching, peer coaching, skill building, and sponsorship with senior leaders in the organization, as well as action learning as well. And And I should note that we've seen great impact in leveraging the Aurora platform in particular with our early career high potential women. So this is a program that started, a program that's going to continue, and a program that's going to grow to help.
That's great. And I know there was a lot of intention, almost a decade of learning that went into the development of the platform and the experience that almost, I like to call it surround sound, that offers, an opportunity for people to go on a journey together across an organization so that they do make those important peer connections and build those communities, as well as do some learning and, grow those development muscles so that they are ready for those next challenges. Shara, let's have you weigh in on this.
Yeah, I want to go back really quickly and talk about the burnout, which I didn't address before. And what Rocket has done is that we've made this bold move to be a work from home company. So this was really critical, and it empowers our Rocketeers and women a whole new level of choice, right? Choice in how they're going to balance, integrate, or manage their work and lives together. So I just wanted to point that out. And so when we're talking about the broken rung, so being in technology, we're already challenged to access and retain talent who are women. And so just this past year, we really started to drill down and focus, set goals. We launched our first ever cohort of Aurora, where we were able to give women at different phases in their careers some focused time on their leadership, and accompany that with coaching and an opportunity to build these peer-to-peer networks across Rocket. And remember, it's a global organization, so we had women in cohorts who are on different continents and in different countries. And we were really able to network and create connections across the organization where they may not have otherwise created those connections. And so they can share resources and knowledge with one another. So the Aurora program really helped to facilitate that. And we're going to continue to send women through that. It's been highly successful. So that is one of the ways that we've invested in our women to really try to solve for that broken rung and pay closer attention. We have stated goals of increasing representation among women, right, in senior leadership. And we just released a quarterly report where we are showing our Rocketeers, this is where we are, right? It's a level of accountability, because if you make public, this is who we are, and these are our goals, then your organization can hold you accountable for that, right? And so all of this focus really, we're looking at hiring, at promotion structures, and the goal to really just help to eliminate the outstanding biases that exist in systems currently, right? Just sort of dismantling that.
I really like that, because, and I'm sure that we all know that if you state goals, you have a much better chance of actually achieving them than if they're amorphous goals. And so we can't get anywhere if we don't look at the numbers. And I feel like that Women in the Workplace report is showing us every year where we are and where we're going. And, it's funny, as I was thinking about our talk today, and I looked at that stat about we are at 1988 participation levels for women in the workplace. Oh my gosh, that's 33 years ago. We have dialed ourselves back 33 years in literally under 2 years. So I feel like that the numbers are critical, and having the goals is critical, and having the commitment to try different solutions and use technology and people to sort of build the extra supports that are needed. Okay, I'm going to encourage everybody. We're having such a good conversation here. I was going to have another question, but I think we're going to have to go into Q&A, because I want to make sure people get some questions answered. Please put some questions either in the chat or the Q&A area, and I think I will give this one to Summer, which is, how do you hold the men in the workplace, in your workplace, accountable to educate themselves on the issues facing women? And how do you get a good pulse on how educated the workforce is on women's issues in the workforce in general?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question. And I think it's similar to all dimensions of diversity. It's how do we hold ourselves as communities accountable for the varying challenges that we see, whether it's people of color or it's women. One of the things we talk in our organization a lot about is about passport diversity and ensuring that we've got adequate representation across our global organization. And so I think that that then becomes an organization-wide requirement that we're leaning into the many different dimensions of diversity and holding people accountable for that. And sometimes that's about making sure that you're making awareness and education easy to access. So if it's buried in an LMS somewhere and it's hard to find, or if it's really difficult to get to because where you hold content is challenged, those are systemic issues that we've got to get to, because this may not be something that somebody proactively wants to do lots of clicks to get to and then sit through a long e-learning. We've got to make sure it's easy to get to. We've got to make sure that it is easy to digest and something that is attractive for people to consume, whether it's about women or any other dimension of diversity. So we've got to think about those types of things. And then Shara had mentioned just some of the systemic things that we have to be doing. So one of the steps that we've taken, many organizations have as well, is requiring diverse panels. So both as panel members and as interview sets, we have to have diversity before we'll close a job requisition. Those type of systemic changes just force that awareness and force the conversation, whether it's around bias or whatever comes up. And I think we've got to think holistically about those things.
Okay, great. Okay, a couple more questions. Anybody can answer these. One is, when you talk about investing in women early in their career to fix the broken rung, what time frame do you mean? What are you talking about on that? And then another question: how can a woman who's just beginning her career have confidence? Anybody want to take one of those?
I'm
Sure,
happy to jump in. Go ahead, Sylvia.
No, thanks so much. So in terms of, defining what is early career, it is what it sounds like. People who are really starting on the journey of a career and really learning about themselves and what does it mean to connect with others. So, I mean, we define it, in terms of, from college up to 5 to 10 years, like kind of within that range. We have a young professionals network that really is amazing in terms of really providing that level of support and exposure and building that confidence in people that are earlier in the career by connecting with others overall. I can't remember the other half of that question, Addie.
Basically, how do you think about fixing the broken rung, and is it in different cadences and, et cetera?
Yeah, one way I'll answer that, and I'm going to point to something that Summer had pointed out in terms of, it's not just about going to your LMS and taking some e-learning and there you're done with it. Is, organizations really need to look at every single system that you have in the organization on where you can build this in. So when you're doing talent reviews, like for example, really spending time in educating and calling managers in, for example, on maybe some inadvertent or unaware biases as well. So looking at every single system that you have to build in that opportunity to educate, to improve what we're doing from a talent system perspective, and not just relying on standalone training to make that happen.
Yeah, just one thing to kind of pipe in here. The philosophy behind Aurora is that no one has any time, and no one really, has like, an hour or 2 hours to either watch a video or to read. And not that many people are reading these days. So, I mean, I think the Instagram culture that we have is all about pictures and a few words. So the key is, like, how do you break through the clutter? We know, we just went through and looked at the data, that women have so much to do as it is. So that, the key is, like, how do you get those moments? How do you teach moment by moment in short spurts? And that's actually a philosophical approach that we've taken with the Aurora platform. It's not something you do on your own. all the time, and it's also something that you can get in bits and snippets that can have impact and positivity on your life. I have another question that Shara, I think you would love to answer. What do women need later in their careers? Do they need similar things, different things? How do you think about that in relation to providing support and growth?
You know, that's a really interesting question. I don't often get that because women go through their career, may have, and I think that's a really individual answer. Yet, what I would like to say, and it sort of dovetails off of the last question, and I think it's important for women throughout their career, which is sponsorship, right? It depends on where you are later on in your career. Are you sort of content with where you've what you've achieved, or are you really looking to achieve what you've been longing and working for all of your career, to sort of end on that note? And sponsorship is key, and I would even say one of the singular keys to advancement and growth for women. We know that men have these sort of informal network sponsorships. It's something that's not formal, right? They have others in the room, executives or folks who are advocates for them, showing their work, talking about them, making recommendations. So that's how it would answer that at every stage in your career. Mentorship is good, and they could be the same person, but not always.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, Char. I mean, one thing that I think that I always contemplate is making sure that your relationships are authentic. And, you know, you can't just run around going, I need to find a sponsor. I need to find 4 sponsors. And will you be my sponsor? You know, it's really more about, you know, can you help someone? Can someone help you? Can someone provide some perspective that you don't have? And we certainly deliver that via Aurora, because we have these professional executive level, we call them guides, who are executive professional women that have already gone through their career, that actually can share in an unbiased way, you know, the benefits and the drawbacks of making one decision or another. And that's in real time, getting unbiased feedback about choices an individual is making. I think we are just about wrapping up here. It's 2:58. I know there's probably a lot more. Does anybody want to say anything really quickly before I close off? Okay, I feel like that. Oh, Sylvia, I think you wanted to say one more thing.
No, I think, well, first of all, this has been, I agree, this has been an amazing discussion. I love the questions, and you know, this is a forum where we can continue to learn from each other. This is about learning, you know, and, you know, trying things that haven't been tried before. So I think, you know, leveraging these types of networks, I've learned a lot from Summer and Shara, and through some of the questions that came in, and that's kind of, you know, part of the magic here, you know, in terms of making sure that continues.
All right, well, thank you so much, Sylvia, Summer, and Shara, for your advice, your insights, you know, and also being very real and honest, which I think is not so easy to do, but I think each one of you came and you shared sort of where you are in your organization and, you know, where you are in your journey to make change, and that you are also proactively making changes by doing concrete things. And I think that that is to be applauded. We need to try more things. We need to think differently. We need to support individuals and groups differently, because everyone is coming with different challenges and opportunities. So on behalf of Reach Higher, I want to say thank you so much to each and every one of you and all of our listeners. I hope this was helpful and inspirational. We want to make change, and we'd love to come back and talk about next year and when we're here and show that we've made progress. So I think it behooves each and every one of us to try to drive those numbers in a good direction and make change for women of color, for underrepresented groups, and to make sure everyone is engaged. Thank you so very much.
This concludes our webcast today. I'd like to thank our lovely presenters, as well as all of you, for joining us. If you joined late and would like to view this webcast again, the recording and slides will be available on hr.com in our archived webcasts. Your HRCI credit will show up in your hr.com account within 2 business days. We will also send out an email with the credit information. Please take a few moments to fill out the post-webcast survey that will open on your screen. Your feedback is very important to us. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day.